So in this video, I'm going to think about the problems associated with market power, and then I'm going to think about the ways in which government can intervene. All right, so here we have, think of the pharmaceutical industry. So you have an area with a considerable amount of market power. Market power is one of our instances of market failure. It leads to a situation where there's an inefficient output that's produced. Let's kind of explore that here. So we have the example where, life-saving drugs can be expensive. Pharmaceutical companies need patents, which gives them incentive to spend the billions of dollars to invent new drugs. And then the sellers exploit their market power until the patent expires. Now, one of the problems, so firstly, this is bad for consumers. On the other hand, the ability to exploit market power is part of the reason why it becomes advantageous for the pharmaceutical companies to develop the drugs in the first place, because the research and development is really costly and really uncertain. And so you have to think about the expected value calculation, the probability, the expenditure, the probability of a gain, the expenditure, probability of a loss, and then it has to come out in favor of the firm making the investment. Otherwise, the drugs aren't made in the first place. And so that's actually kind of part of an issue here. But let's just explore kind of the issues of market power more generally. So let's think about comparing market power, like a monopoly situation, to a situation of perfect competition where there's no market power. Well, other things equal, market power is going to lead to higher prices, an inefficiently smaller quantity, and then larger economic profits. Businesses with the market power are going to be able to survive even with relatively inefficiently high costs. Some of these things are good, some of these things are bad. Well, inefficiently small quantity is bad. Higher economic profits, that could be good or bad. Depends. We have to think really carefully about the industry and the degree to which this is necessary for the firms to survive in the first place. Businesses with market parts with inefficiently high costs, that's important. So it could be good or bad. Other things equal, we don't want firms with high cost to be the ones producing in the market. We want the firms with low cost to be the ones producing in the market. Otherwise, that's called productive inefficiency. But there could be an industry that's going to have high costs, such as think of the airlines industry. And what's important is to have market power to be able to have the airlines be able to survive. And I think this has been part of the Justice Department's reasoning for allowing mergers of airlines to create these really strong oligopolistic firms, probably on the belief that some degree of market power is necessary for these firms to be able to survive. And we argue hey, look, there's some industries where even though there's going to be market power and monopoly or strong oligopoly, that might be what's necessary to have that industry in the first place. And so there might be compelling reasons so I don't want you to think necessarily there's definitely some bad things with market power. I don't want you to think it's especially in bad things with monopoly. I don't want you to think it's always objectively bad. It's definitely like so many other aspects in the course, a situation where we want to consider the circumstances. All right, so how does a shift from pricing with market power to perfect competition change outcomes? Well, market power is going to be that pricing is going to be driven by, one way that market power pricing could work is our standard single price. If they're going to charge a single price in the market, you're going to look and find where does marginal revenue cross marginal cost. That's going to give us the market power quantity, go up to the demand curve to give us the market power price. Okay. How does that differ from what perfect competition would do? Oh, well, in competition, we're going to set price equal to marginal cost. Where's the price coming from? Prices come from demand curves. So we'll set price equal to marginal cost. This means the competitive market's going to produce way out here. Much larger quantity, right? Larger quantity meaning more transactions. And so this is where, remember we were saying market power is going to give us inefficiently small quantity. That's relative to the situation with no market power. Perfect competitive outcomes way out here, monopoly outcome or market power outcomes here, which tells us, with perfect competition, since they're reducing until price equals marginal cost, this happens where the demand equals marginal cost curve and a much larger quantity. We get two lessons. Firstly, the market price outcome exceeds the competitive price. The market power price is going to be higher. Competitive price is going to be lower. This is markup. This amount right here that Professor Wolfers has labeled as exceeds, right? This arrow, this distance between the market price and the competitive price, this is markup. So the markup is going to be the difference between price and marginal cost. That's where profits come from, right? Okay, so market power quantity is going to be, less than the market power or than the competitive quantity, right? It's going to be a smaller quantity. That's a problem because this triangle right here is what we could call deadweight loss. This is the inefficiency due to the monopoly. We know it's inefficient because remember, what's the demand curve? Theory of demand is the theory of marginal benefit. This captures willingness to pay and marginal benefits of consumers. Here's the marginal cost curve. This is telling us that the monopoly, the market power firm, is going to produce this quantity. The competitive industry would produce this much. What's happened is, if the market's monopolized, all these units are no longer produced, which means there's foregone economic surplus. Look, buyers value these units more highly than they cost to produce because the demand curve lies above the supply. Well, the firm with market power doesn't have a supply curve, but above the marginal cost curve. Okay, so this is deadweight loss right here, and this is the inefficiency due to the market power. Okay. All right, so what happens? Well, a firm with market power earns a healthy profit margin equal to market power price minus average cost, or price minus marginal cost is the markup, but that's where profits come from. These profits mean the business with market power can survive even if it has inefficiently high cost. Why? Because it's got this profit margin. Okay. All right, so the price in perfect competition is lower than the price under imperfect competition. The quantity in perfect competition is higher than the quantity under imperfect competition. This is correct. All right, increasing competition can lead to better outcomes. Yeah, competition leads to lower prices and a higher quantity. Market power leads businesses to produce a lower quantity and sell at a higher price, which is an underproduction problem. That's where the deadweight loss or the inefficiency came from. The higher prices are a problem for customers, but a benefit to sellers. So economists aren't going to be like immediately. This isn't going to be the area that we're immediately going to judge as being, other things equal, like really bad, because, well, higher prices are bad for consumers. We don't like that, but it's good for sellers. Sellers are important by virtue of generating this economic activity and creating creating markets for the inputs, including labor and so on and so forth. So that's a complex issue about the higher prices. Well, it's bad for consumers. I don't like the part where the high price will price some people out of the market. This is like an intensive versus extensive discussion. But what's definitely bad is a smaller quantity. It's not best for society because this is speaking to deadweight loss created by foregone economic activity. These are trades that are not taking place that should. All right, patents provide an incentive to engage in research. Yeah, that's one of the sources of market power. And so this is incentive to engage in research. This is why there's this sort of like difficult issue because the patent protects the monopoly, but that might also be necessary to create the product in the first place. And so there's some really important issues. All right. We want to think carefully about that in the context of the public policy used to restrain market power. Then we can think about the ways that the government interacts to restrain market power. So other things equal, we want competition that's going to be good for society as a whole. That doesn't mean always. It means other things equal. So given some certain assumptions about how the market works, we want more competition. As I mentioned about the natural monopoly, if you have a natural monopoly that's a particular cost structure that'll select, like Darwinian natural selection for a single firm, their competition is actually inefficient. But other things equal, more competition is better. Governments regulate markets through a couple laws, or a couple sets of laws, those that promote competition and those that minimize exploitation of market power. So for instance, like we don't want collusion. Collusion is where firms organize to keep prices artificially high or to not compete. And so there's anti-collusion laws that act against price fixing and promote more competition. There's merger laws, maybe preventing horizontal mergers. Those are firms that would be competing against each other, and specifically in cases where this would lead to consolidating the market and lead towards higher prices. There's also laws that thwart the abuses of market power. It's not illegal to be a monopoly. It's illegal to abuse monopoly power. So the act, like the bad version of monopoly, the pernicious form is monopolization. That's like abusing market power, and that's specifically what antitrust laws act against. So when you think of like historical cases of Ma Bell and AT&T and Microsoft, the issue wasn't that, or Standard Oil, the issues wasn't that it was a monopoly. The issue was what they were doing with monopoly power. All right, so international trade fosters competition. Yeah, if you don't have a rival locally, then you can have, if we think about rivals internationally, that's important. So there's different types of mergers. So a competitive merger creates a more fearsome competitor. So this is more balance, right? It's bad for rivals, could be good for consumers. An anti-competitive merger reduces competition for all sellers. So it's good for rivals, bad for consumers. Now, to see if a merger hurts consumers, you could figure out if it helps rival firms or not. Can you name a recent merger that reduced competition in a particular market? So you can think of, I guess, firms buying out other firms, different types of acquisitions. So you have like Amazon buying Whole Foods or something like this, and this sort of affects competition in grocery industry. Okay. Laws that minimize harm from exercising market power. A government can implement price ceilings. So price ceilings create inefficiency if the market is already competitive, but can promote efficiency in the case where there's already market failure. So set price equal to marginal cost. This would impose the competitive market pricing on the market that eliminates the discount effect, eliminates the underproduction problem, and ultimately has the effect of imposing competitive market pricing on the market. Well, if the market's already perfectly competitive, then price ceilings reduce economic surplus if it's not set equal to marginal cost. If you have an imperfectly competitive market, now the price ceiling is going to increase economic surplus because now you have the situation where the government's sort of rectifying the market failure and eliminating inefficiency, promoting efficiency. You could think of laws that link prices to costs, and this is important for interacting with the incentive to produce and promote high quality products, and important for the incentives to keep costs down. And so that's another sort of way that governments can influence market power. The only case that's coming to mind is there's a case of like an integrated power company that had this coal mine, and that was a coal producing plant, and they had a restriction on how much they could raise their energy prices above like the cost of coal. And so the power company was coal-fired power plant, and they could raise the per kilowatt hour or whatever prices by some percentage if the price of coal or if the cost of producing coal or something like that rose. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up wanting to raise the prices considerably more. So what they did was they obtained a coal mine, and they integrated their sort of vertical integration, and then they are able to raise their electricity prices by virtue of kind of raising the production costs, raising the costs in the coal division. So the point is, so firstly, like you can have some of these kind of perverse incentives being perpetuating through an industry to the extent that they're able to vertically integrate. It's really interesting and really important for government, especially setting policy. It's one of the reasons why government needs to employ so many economists kind of thinking about policy and trying to figure out exactly how these different loopholes and different things end up being exploited. So anyway, that's a fascinating example, and cases where you can get kind of the incentive structure changing by virtue of tying prices to costs can lead to interesting results. I talked about natural monopoly already. You talk about natural monopoly here a little bit more formally. It's a market in which it's the cheapest, it's the most efficient for a single firm to serve the market. Like water, gas, electricity, utilities. Society's best interest is for price equal to marginal cost, but here price is lower than average cost. But then if price is lower than average cost, the supplier would lose money. Suppliers can stay in business only by offering prices that are too high. The argument would be there's a large fixed cost of operating and maintaining or creating entering and maintaining this operation. There's a low marginal cost of serving an additional consumer. If you have competition, the problem is, well, there's inefficient duplication. We don't want extra like water pipes, extra power lines, extra so on and so forth, extra utilities, extra gas lines. We only want one set. Otherwise, there's sort of inefficient duplication. The other issue is that if you have multiple companies operating, now you have a lot of consumers being siphoned off. You have the volume of demand being siphoned off, and so no individual firm can recoup their large fixed cost, and that's a problem. So anyway, what the government will do is they'll select and they'll prevent entry. You'll have a single firm in the market, but now that firm needs to set the price too high. So what can happen? Well, the government could make this a public utility, set price equal to marginal cost, and then use tax revenues to pay for losses as one solution. Then in the age of deregulation, then there's privatization, and then you have the firm you have the government setting price controls on the price, not allowing it to rise too high. But natural monopolies create this really huge problem, as you can imagine, both for governments to regulate. All right, the last thing, price ceilings decrease economic surplus in perfectly competitive markets and decrease economic surplus in imperfectly competitive markets. So price ceilings, bad in a competitive market, good in a competitive market, or in an imperfectly competitive market. Price ceilings, bad when the market's already operating efficiently, maybe good when the market's operating inefficiently. Key takeaways. So the market power is the extent to which a seller can charge a higher price without losing many sales to competing businesses. Market structures range from perfect competition with no market power to monopolistic competition and oligopolies with some power to monopolies with a lot of market power. The shape of the firm's demand curve depends on the market structure. It's flatter when there's less market power, steeper when there's more market power. Marginal revenue with market power is equal to the output effect minus the discount effect. I want you to think about that conceptually, not mathematically. With market power, firms set the quantity at the price where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. With market power, firms set the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You go up to the demand curve to find the price. Market power leads businesses to charge a higher price, set a smaller quantity, and earn larger profits and survive with inefficiently high costs. Public policy can't eliminate market power. It can limit abuses and can promote efficiency. All right, hope you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and conclude here. I'll see you